I'm Seth Clevenger, Managing Editor of Features at Transport Topics. I'm talking with Tim Leonard, who's the Chief Technology Officer at Trimble Transportation. Trimble is the parent company of TMW Systems, PeopleNet, ALK Technologies, 10-4 Systems, and several other suppliers of technology in the trucking industry. So thank you very much for joining us, Tim. I appreciate you taking the time.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and Tim, blockchain has really been a hot topic over the last year and a half or so within the technology world, and increasingly has also been a real area of focus in the transportation industry. And Tim, it's great to have you on because this is an area that you have a lot of expertise in. And I wanted to hear from you to start off. Why should fleet executives care about blockchain? Why should they be paying attention to it? And what can blockchain do better than today's systems?
Yeah, excellent question, Seth. I think when you look at the opportunities that all of executives has inside the fleet capabilities is the enablement to look at the efficiencies and the proficiencies of the fleets themselves. I think when you look at the low margins that each one of the fleets has, what blockchain uniquely offers is that first class of visibilities. In today's technology, there's not a lot of opportunities that you have to actually see things completely end to end. And when I started working with blockchain 3 years ago, it just became so distinctive that the validation of a trusted data set, completely visible, could enable multiple business cases that would help produce that opportunities to help take manual processes and actually enablement and process things a lot quicker, faster, and make things transparent, particularly with the relationships between shippers and carriers. So unique application, something that's very distinctive, but at the same time, very dynamic in a way that addresses all modes of transportation capabilities. And we have several business cases we could discuss in this.
Okay, yeah, and speaking of those business cases, you guys at TMW and Trimble have identified, I believe, 54 different business cases that could potentially be transformed by blockchain. So there's all kinds of different possibilities here. Would you care to take us through a few key examples?
No, I'd be happy to. I think, and I'll highlight a few. You're right. It certainly could spend a lot of time going through all of them. I like the cases, for example, around brokerage. Again, I think you're absolutely right in terms of I've been doing this for a while. We've looked at the business cases first, solving problems within the industry. So let's look at brokerage. A very, very specific example, which is carrier onboarding utilizing insurance verification. What this has enabled us to do is actually work with other various associations. This particular one is an insurance organization that's been set up that enables this hyperledger, our hyperledger, to effectively work with another one. And so why that's so important today is with insurance verification, it's very time-consuming and expensive task for really any size broker to really uniquely identify an insurance policy and then have it connected into a very dedicated ledger that maintains that data set, and all you're doing is getting verifications. And the other thing is it's publicly data that's hosted and maintained, for example, by DOT. So why not join a blockchain that has publicly ready available, design something that could be very specific and enable you to take manual processes today that take 10 to 20 to 30 hours a month and completely automate them. Another great example, for example, is like within LTL. Blockchain applications that track, validate freight classes would be extremely helpful in the LTL capability. So, those are just two of the examples. The one that I really like most is the example around intermodal. When you look at intermodal, the blockchain applications can and will help facilitate in real time a trusted access really around the formations around order documentations, data that can be transformed, data associations with a document where we can help intermodal transportation is, for example, Mexico to United States to Canada. By having these centrally located, facilitated in real time, that intermodal lookup capabilities to track information can be done now in seconds, and that enables us to take this thing and actually attack something in transportation that every executive wants to go after, which is the lack of proficiencies, inefficiencies, which has been one of our Achilles heels in the transportation world.
Sure. And there's also opportunity for some of the most basic of freight transactions, right? Just kind of the RFP and bid process, and direct communication really between shippers and carriers. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. One of our main business cases focused very heavy in looking at something, we know that if you were to walk in the front door of any major carriers and say, hey, I'm going to gut and replace your EDI with my own proprietary code, I think they would kick us all out. But if you could walk into a carrier organization, you could embed the blockchain application foundation right inside of a non-committal transportation connection, like, for example, TMW's Bid Engage product. That then ties in information right into the RFP process. The RFP from the shipper, the carriers to the bid, the enablement of that stored inside of a blockchain gives complete visibility and transparency between two relationships that we want to grow and build together. And by the way, that particular opportunity really is agnostic within a standard itself. So standards don't really have to be completed, but yet we saw one of the fundamental problems on the front end process before the TMS that really provides the opportunities for saving time, cost, and manual tracking opportunities.
Okay. Another area that has gotten some attention as a potential use of blockchain in transportation is vehicle maintenance records. And I understand that you have some experience with that predates your time at Trimble back when you were working at General Motors. And perhaps you weren't calling it blockchain at the time, but it was much the same concept. Can you talk a little bit more about exactly what you were doing there?
And again, you're exactly right. When I started looking at blockchain, this goes back to the first white paper, then my earlier years, particularly at General Motors. When you're looking at the recall situation and enabling us to tie specific records of what was manufacturing to anything that may have been recall, there was scattered sets of data everywhere. That's not any unique problem with any company, whether it's GM or anywhere else. However, what was really unique was I immediately saw the unique identification of a record set that was indisputable, but in a real-time fashion, and it was recordable. This really led me into the fundamental concepts is that if I can store data that is trusted, that no one can touch, that I can make it transparent, and this is what I believe, for example, Mary Barr, extremely one of the best leaders I've had the pleasure of working for, tied together the opportunities to be, we want to expose the information so that we're transparent, but we also want to be accountable to be able to map the data into something that people can readily see and to trust that we will show you the information and that there's nothing behind the hidden door on that. And that's what really started my mind thinking that if this is so important to somebody like CEO of General Motors, this could transcend into the transportation world because it would help build the relationships of trust between businesses like a shipper, like a carrier, or carrier to brokerage. So that really was the foundation of where I started with 3 years ago, and I've never stopped since.
Okay. And we've explored some of the potential, some of the real possibilities for blockchain, and it's interesting to think about all these use cases, but just how long will it take, and what will it take for trucking to really adopt and use blockchain applications, and how far off is this, do you think?
Yeah, and again, I think there's a lot of give and take within the transportation trucking industry. I see a lot of adoptions in other parts of the market itself, particularly in Europe and in China, India and Israel and Dubai. We do have a little bit of an adoption process issue. Do we wait for standards? Do we then start building some items that we learn from? And quite honestly, Seth, I think when you look at the opportunities that we can move the needle in specific areas of manual processes that are being done, you don't affect the very low margins that happen today within trucking. Again, I go back to the example. Let me roll out an application that exists today in production that has embedded blockchain hookups. And this isn't transparent with, for example, our Bid Engage product that enables you to actually do a hook, for example, into a non-TMW TMS system. That's where we wanted to go with blockchain, to be agnostic enough to support individuals, but yet transparent enough to have a ledger that has the system of record of information, starting with an embedded application of blockchain, feeding into the overall unique ledger itself, was the entry point that we felt that it would be less cost effective for our carriers, and then two, it would be less risk for them to try out something that enabled them to see, touch, and feel a blockchain capability. Again, I don't want to disrupt the existing business. I believe trucking utilization is still king today. I don't want to affect the utilization capabilities around anything that I'm doing. I want them to get to trust blockchain, adopt blockchain, but I want to do it in a way, instead of eating the whole elephant, they're eating pieces of the elephant and gaining trust into a new technology that can change the entire marketplace.
Okay, yeah, this will be fascinating to watch in the months and years ahead. And maybe the last one I'll leave you with here, Tim. I mentioned at the top some of the increasing number of companies that are now part of Trimble and that are in different areas of trucking technology. TMW, PeopleNet, ALK, and 10-4, perhaps just the name, probably the best known. What does that kind of vantage point give you when you consider possibilities for blockchain? I mean, because you're working not only with the carriers but also with shippers and brokers.
That actually has given me an unfair advantage, I guess I would say, is that the opportunities to work in construction, agriculture, the geospacing fields inside of Trimble itself, the power of Trimble with domain expertise. One of the things I've noticed is that the domain expertise within a ledger itself becomes one of the most useful, productive ledgers, because they know how to set up the conditions within the business events for the data that rest within the ledger, the types of data you should store in the ledger. Because Trimble is one of the leaders in every one of those verticals, the power of the whole of Trimble has become just so empowering for us to roll out unified capabilities. What I mean by that is, within the agriculture capabilities, I know that there's some level of transportation crossover, concepts around farmer to table type principles, things where a farmer will grow something, he'll enable that to be tracked. We then have to haul the food and freight to distributions. They then distribute through the last mile into people's houses. So tying the two verticals or the two sectors together with the concepts of blockchain has now empowered both of the blockchains, or the two sectors, to closely work, but more importantly, it becomes one application. Now, the whole concept is fundamentally around the domain expertise inside of Trimble itself, and that's the power that Trimble brings to the table from a unification. Our knowledge within agriculture, construction, geospacing, and transportation as a unit is second to none in the entire world. I would put us up against anybody.
All right, Tim. Well, you know what? This has been a great conversation. I appreciate all your insights, but I think we've reached a pretty good stopping point here. So I'd like to just thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you, Seth, and to be able to talk on the air with you guys. Thank you so much.
You bet.